Now, the Security Cabinet approving measures to shut down the Hezbollah-affiliated media wing, Al-Mayadeen, from operating in Israel. This is in line with emergency powers approved by the cabinet last month that would shut down media that, quote, harms the security of Israel during a time of war. The cabinet first moved to shutter the Qatari-owned Al Jazeera after the outlet reportedly gave Israeli troop positions to Hamas, but Israel put a stay on that order, largely due to Qatar's involvement in any possible hostage negotiations. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant characterizes Al-Mayadeen, though, as enemy propaganda. For more on this, we are joined in studio by Dan Perry, former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press. Dan, good to have you with us. What's propaganda versus free press?
It's a great question. I mean, I often write opinion articles in various publications. Is that propaganda if I support some cause? It's a very slippery slope to start banning publications or broadcast outlets because you deem them to be propaganda. If they break the law, if they systematically truly harm the security of the state, that's one thing. But if they're not sympathetic to an action that you're undertaking or to a policy of the Israeli government, I don't generally recommend it. Now look, Al-Mayadeen is obviously sympathetic to Hezbollah, and I'm sure that they favor Hamas in their coverage. So I doubt this is the hill I want to die on, defending them. I'll just say, I also want Israel to be a country that has a free press and that has a very high bar for shutting down journalistic operations, even if they are unpleasant. Indeed, that is precisely when your principles of democracy and free speech are tested. So I would have hoped that if they take this move, they would not project indifference to the reputational damage of becoming a country that shuts down media, and it would make a real serious case and say, look, this is what they did, A, B, C. They falsely reported that Israeli troops committed some atrocity, and it's obviously completely false, and we can't have this happen because it agitates Hezbollah. Then I'd kind of understand it. But what I'm hearing instead is Shlomo Karhi, the communications minister, who is not a fan of the free press, to say the least, or really of liberal democracy, saying, well, they're against Israel and we shouldn't take it. And that seems like a little bit of Karhi being frustrated that his part of the authoritarian overhaul, which was to clamp down on the press, didn't get to happen, and
I want to jump in.
Now we can do something else.
The elephant in the room question is ultimately, what does it mean to cause harm to the country during a time of war?
Well, I mean, look, if they are riling up potential enemy populations and reporting false things in a way that is clearly tendentious, I'm still not overly comfortable with shutting down a media outlet. I mean, Fox reported false things in the wake of the 2020 election in the U.S., and no one said to shut them down. Maybe they get sued. That said, Israel's in a state of war, and there's emergency measures that were approved, and I can understand certain potentially overzealous action against enemy propaganda being taken that isn't so democratic, but I'd just like to see them argue their case a little bit better. If they don't, it kind of looks like populism directed at the Israeli public to show them that they're really tough on enemy propaganda. And let me just say, Al-Mayadeen is not a Hezbollah station. They are a Lebanese station. Now, their ownership is known to be sympathetic to Hezbollah, and you mentioned affiliated. I'm not sure I've seen the affiliation papers, but I have no doubt they support Hezbollah. That's clear. For Israel to be the kind of country that allows a broadcast outlet that supports Hezbollah to operate in Israel is good for Israel. That is Israeli propaganda, okay? People in Lebanon see that, and they say to themselves, wait, I24 is not operating in Lebanon. Israel's a better country. Now, Israel is forgoing that if it starts shutting down media whose broadcasts it doesn't approve of.
It's a definitely interesting view of things. I guess it comes down to how it's perceived, and hopefully people do get the message, but it has to be balanced with, as you pointed out yourself, what's likely to cause a riot.
I'd love to see all news operations be as serious as I24 and a handful of others, but that would be a perfect world that we do not live in.
Let's talk about that sort of international pressure. We've seen these images in the press of Gaza completely obliterated. We've seen protests, hundreds of thousands strong, across just about every major European country, demanding a ceasefire, demanding an end to the war. When we've got these statements, how long does Israel have, and how much is public perception going to play into that?
Netanyahu today insisted that Israel continue for as long as it must, even if it must reject demands by the world. That said, there is an understanding in Israel that because of the degree of support America gives Israel, because of its dependence on the U.S. in a variety of ways, it can't really say no to a U.S. ultimatum. I think there are a number of variables here. One of them is to what extent are people still getting killed in Gaza that the world believes are civilians? I don't think the West can tolerate that and stay on good terms with Israel for much more than indeed a few weeks. I mean, it's horrible that it should happen for a day, but there was understanding after the atrocities of October 7th that there's going to be collateral damage to a major Israeli mission. For this to go on for months and months, when there's no convincing counterpoint to the claims that many thousands have been killed, and by the way, I don't think we know how many thousands have really been killed, but that narrative has set in. Or whether there were Hamas operatives versus civilians. Clearly, many have died in this war on the Gaza side. I think if civilian deaths end, because Israel has already occupied northern Gaza and almost everyone has fled, that changes the dynamic, and we'll see the pressure diminish. There's also the question of what constitutes a destruction of Hamas. Notice that Gallant and others, the defense minister, are already talking about how Hamas has lost control of Gaza. It sort of looks to me like they are preparing the way for a declaration of victory, essentially, which I think they would like to be able to have, because no one wants this war to go on forever. The question is whether, if they do that and take over northern Gaza, Hamas will remain in power in southern Gaza and keep firing rockets. We don't know. We really don't know the current state of Hamas. We don't know if the entire leadership is in tunnels under Shifa Hospital or in fact in southern Gaza, which is a safe zone. So there's a number of variables that could enable the war to go on for significantly longer. But for the current dynamic, which is the perception of a humanitarian crisis and of massive civilian casualties in Gaza, it most certainly cannot without Israel finding itself at loggerheads with the entire Western world.
And what you're describing there is a sort of mission accomplished moment. Reminds us of George Bush on the aircraft carrier back in Iraq, and that was widely panned as being, well, nowhere near the end of the mission.
But you see, the mission, in a way, it's interestingly analogous, because the mission there had been accomplished when it comes to the removal of Saddam Hussein from office in Baghdad. It does look like Hamas will have been removed from office in Gaza City. What followed, and why the Bush declaration of victory or of mission accomplished looks laughable in retrospect, is because of the insurgency. And the insurgency turned out to be the whole story for the Americans in the latter 5, 6, 7 years of their stay in Iraq. Will Hamas be able to stage a similar insurgency in northern Gaza when it's been almost cleared of civilians and they're coming out of tunnels, probably starving, is an open question. I think the Israeli military may have reason to be optimistic. No one should be celebrating the removal of 1 million people from their homes. And I think Israel will have a lot of work to do compensating them and rebuilding them, and it's sort of taking responsibility for the Gaza Strip. It won't be so simple to keep them in southern Gaza as refugees. Nonetheless, that appears to have been some version of a stroke of genius to compel the population to really move out of the way for a while and turn this into a fight without as much potential for collateral damage. Seems to have been a winning strategy, or at least that's how it looks right now. It may look different if it turns out that the hospitals haven't been evacuated, and already we're hearing about sick people dying in the hospitals. And of course, there's another counter narrative of Hamas preventing fuel from getting to the hospitals. That comes from Israel, of course. I haven't seen it proven to me, but it doesn't sound unbelievable. And it'll be interesting. After Hamas has been cleared out of northern Gaza City, northern Gaza, and the people return, as I imagine they will one day, not so long from now, to see what public opinion really is among the people of Gaza when Hamas is out of power and they're free to say, just to speak their mind. Obviously, there's more than one theory about the degree to which Hamas had real popular support in Gaza, and I can tell you from my limited experience, having been in Gaza a few times and having had colleagues who worked in Gaza and their families and friends from Gaza, I think Israelis overestimate the degree of support. I think we should maintain the distinction between Gaza, the people of Gaza, and Hamas. And from my point of view, even if Hamas had a depressingly large degree of support in Gaza, let's say 30%, that would be depressingly large. I know many people despise them, and from my perspective, the people of Gaza are no less than Israelis, and perhaps in some ways much more, the victims of Hamas. And these confused and naive people in the West who support Hamas because they support Palestine are so tragically misguided that one doesn't know if to laugh or to cry.